The great palace stood tall on the capital world of Valdoria Prime. Its towers reached toward the purple sky, and its walls gleamed with silver light. Inside those walls, Princess Liara sat in the Grand Council chamber, listening to words that made her blood run cold. Her father, Emperor Caldris, looked older than she had ever seen him. The war was taking its toll. Around the long table sat generals and advisors, all wearing worried faces. General Thavik was speaking, his deep voice filling the chamber. "We have lost 12 systems in 3 months," the general said. "The Crithian Dominion moves faster than we can respond. Their warriors are fierce, their ships are many, and their strategy is sound. If we do not act soon, they will reach the core worlds." Liara felt her hands grip the armrests of her chair. She had lived her whole life in peace. War was something she studied in history books, not something that touched her world. But now it was real. Now it was here. "What do you propose?" her father asked. His voice was steady, but Liara could hear the fear beneath it. General Thavik paused. He looked around the table, then spoke words that changed everything. "We need to hire Jake Morgan." The chamber fell silent. Liara saw advisors exchange nervous glances. Some looked away. Others shifted in their seats. The name hung in the air like a dark cloud. "The human?" one advisor finally said. "You cannot be serious." "I am very serious," Thavik replied. "Morgan is the best warrior in known space. He has turned impossible battles into victories. He has survived things that would kill any of us 10 times over. If anyone can stop the Crithians, it is him." Liara knew the stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy did. They came from a world called Earth, a planet so dangerous that most species would die there within days. The gravity was crushing. The weather was violent. The native predators were deadly. Yet humans not only survived there, they thrived. And then they left their world and went to the stars. Now humans were the most feared species in the galaxy. They could run for hours without stopping. They could heal from wounds that would be fatal to others. They could think clearly even when injured or dying. They were relentless, aggressive, and terrifyingly effective in combat. Jake Morgan was the worst of them all. Or the best, depending on how you looked at it. Stories about him spread across every system. He had fought alone against a Crithian death squad and survived for 3 days. He had walked through plasma fire to reach an enemy command center. He had once killed a warlord in his own throne room during peace talks right in front of his guards. Liara had heard all these stories. She had always thought they were exaggerations. Now sitting in the council chamber, she realized they might all be true. "Morgan is a mercenary," another advisor said. "He fights for money, not honor." "How can we trust him?" "Humans may be dangerous, but they keep their word," Thavik said. "Once Morgan signs a contract, he will honor it. That is their way. They have strange ideas about honor and duty, but they follow them absolutely." The Emperor looked at Liara. She met his eyes, trying to hide her fear. "What do you think, daughter?" Liara took a breath. "I think we should do whatever it takes to protect our people. If that means hiring a human warrior, then we should do it." She said the words, but inside her heart was racing. The thought of meeting this human terrified her. But she could not show weakness, not here, not now. Her father nodded slowly. "Very well. General Thavik, send word to Morgan. Tell him the Zalari Empire wishes to discuss terms." The council continued for another hour, but Liara barely heard any of it. Her mind was spinning. In a few days, maybe a week, Jake Morgan would arrive at the palace. The most dangerous human alive would walk these same halls where she lived. That night, Liara could not sleep. She stood on her balcony looking out at the city lights. The capital was beautiful and peaceful. It was hard to believe that war was coming closer every day. She heard footsteps behind her. Her father joined her on the balcony. For a long moment, they stood together in silence. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Liara admitted. "The stories about humans, about Morgan, they are frightening." "I know," her father said. "I am afraid too. But fear is not always bad. Sometimes it keeps us alive. The question is what we do with that fear." Liara looked at him. In the moonlight, he looked very tired and very old. The weight of the empire rested on his shoulders. "I need you to be strong," he continued. "When Morgan arrives, I want you to be his liaison. You will show him around the palace, brief him on our customs, and work with him on strategy." Liara felt her stomach drop. "Father, I do not think I can." "You can and you will," Caldris said firmly. "You are a princess of the Zalari Empire. Our people need to see that their royal family is not afraid. They need to see us working with our allies, even if those allies are frightening. But Father, he held up a hand, I know this is difficult, but leadership means doing difficult things. If we cannot face our own protector, how can we face our enemies? Liara wanted to argue. She wanted to refuse. But deep down she knew he was right. So she nodded even though her hands were shaking. 3 days later, word came. Jake Morgan had accepted the contract. His ship was already on its way. It would arrive tomorrow. Liara spent that day preparing. She studied everything she could find about humans and their customs. She learned that they valued directness and honesty. They disliked elaborate ceremonies. They respected strength and despised cowardice. She also learned about Earth. The images shocked her. Massive storms that could destroy cities, earthquakes that split the ground, volcanoes that spewed fire, animals with teeth and claws designed for killing. And humans had evolved there, shaped by that brutal world into something unique and terrifying. The next morning, Liara stood in the palace landing bay. She wore her formal robes and carried herself with all the dignity she could manage. Around her stood the ceremonial guard, 50 of the finest warriors in the Empire. They looked impressive in their polished armor, but Liara knew the truth. If Jake Morgan decided to attack, these guards would not stop him. Nothing would stop him. The landing bay doors opened. A ship descended through the atmosphere. It was not the sleek diplomatic vessel Liara had expected. It was a military frigate, scarred and battered from countless battles. Weapons pods bristled from its hull. Burn marks covered its armor. The ship touched down with a heavy thud. Steam hissed from its landing gear. For a long moment, nothing happened. Liara felt her heart pounding. Her hands were clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. Then the boarding ramp lowered. A figure appeared at the top. Jake Morgan was tall for a human, probably close to 6 feet. He wore tactical armor that was as worn and scarred as his ship. His face was hard, with several visible scars cutting across his features. His eyes were a cold blue, scanning the landing bay with the practiced gaze of a predator assessing its surroundings. But what struck Liara most was not his appearance. It was the way he moved. Every step was controlled, economical. There was no wasted motion. He walked down the ramp like a blade cutting through air, precise and deadly. Behind him came a woman in similar armor. She was smaller but moved with the same dangerous grace. This must be Lieutenant Lisa Grant, his second in command. Morgan reached the bottom of the ramp and stopped. His eyes found Liara. For a moment that felt like an eternity. They simply looked at each other. Liara forced herself to step forward. Her legs felt weak, but she made them move. She stopped a respectful distance away and gave a formal bow. Commander Morgan, welcome to Valdoria Prime. I am Princess Liara, and I will be your liaison during your time here. Her voice only shook a little. She was proud of that. Morgan gave a short nod. When he spoke, his voice was rough and tired. Princess, thanks for the welcome. He paused, his eyes still studying her. Let's keep this professional. You show me where I need to be, brief me on the situation, and we'll get to work. No elaborate greetings, no flowery words. Just straight to business. Liara appreciated that, even though part of her had hoped for something less intimidating. Of course, she said. If you will follow me, I will show you to your quarters. As they walked through the palace corridors, Liara was hyper-aware of Morgan walking behind her. She could feel his presence like a physical weight. Every instinct told her to run to get away from this dangerous creature. But she kept walking. She kept her head high and her step steady. She was a princess. She would not show fear, except Morgan noticed anyway. As they passed a decorative statue, he stopped to examine it. Liara had been so tense that when he moved, she flinched. It was just a small movement, barely visible, but Morgan saw it, his expression hardened. His eyes went colder. He straightened and continued walking without a word. When they reached his quarters, Liara gave him a quick briefing on the palace layout and protocols. Morgan listened without comment, his face unreadable. Lieutenant Grant stood nearby, watching everything. Finally, Liara finished. Do you have any questions, Commander? Just one, Morgan said. When do I meet with the Emperor to discuss operational details? Tomorrow morning. The council will convene at dawn. Morgan nodded. Good. We'll be ready. He looked at her directly. You can go now, Princess. Thank you for the escort. It was a dismissal, plain and simple. Liara bowed and left, grateful to escape his presence. That evening, she found herself balcony. Liara spent the next 2 days in the Imperial Archives. The vast library contained information about every known species in the galaxy. She found the section on humans and began to read. What she learned both terrified and fascinated her. Humans came from a world that should have been impossible. Earth was classified as a Class 9 death world. Most civilized species evolved on Class 2 or 3 worlds with gentle climates and few natural dangers. Earth was different. The planet had extreme weather. Hurricanes that could level cities. Tornadoes that ripped everything apart, blizzards that froze flesh in minutes, and humans lived through all of it. They built cities and survived. The gravity was strong enough to crush weaker species. The native predators were designed for killing. Bears, lions, sharks, crocodiles, even the insects could kill you, and somehow humans became the top predator on that world. But the archives also contained other information. Humans had something called endurance hunting. They could chase prey for hours, even days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Other predators were faster, but humans just kept coming. They never stopped. They could heal from injuries that would kill other species. They could think clearly even when wounded. They formed tight bonds with their groups and would die to protect each other. The galaxy called it the human package. Endurance, aggression, loyalty, and the ability to keep fighting when any sane creature would give up. Liara read about human history. Wars, endless wars. They had fought each other for thousands of years. They had developed weapons that could destroy their whole planet. And then, somehow they had stopped fighting each other and turned their attention to the stars. Now they worked as mercenaries, soldiers, and guards. Most species hired them despite being afraid of them. Because when you needed protection, you wanted the most dangerous warrior you could find. But Liara also found something else in the archives. Information about human culture. They had concepts like honor, duty, and loyalty. They made promises and kept them. They followed rules of war, even when it put them at a disadvantage. They protected the weak even when it cost them. It was confusing. How could a species be so violent and so honorable at the same time? How could they be feared across the galaxy but also trusted to keep their word? On the second day, Liara decided to take a risk. She went to the war room where military officers monitored the front lines. She had clearance to be there, though she rarely used it. War had always seemed distant and abstract to her. Now it was very real. The war room was full of displays showing troop movements and battle reports. Officers moved between stations, coordinating defenses. And in the center of it all stood Jake Morgan. He was studying a large holographic map of the border systems. Lieutenant Grant stood beside him, pointing at various positions. They spoke in low voices, too quiet for Liara to hear. Liara stayed near the entrance, not wanting to interrupt. She watched Morgan work. He asked questions. He examined data. He moved markers on the map, planning something. His focus was complete. Nothing else in the room seemed to exist for him. After a while, Grant noticed Liara. The lieutenant said something to Morgan. He looked up, his cold blue eyes finding her across the room. Liara felt her stomach tighten. She had not meant to disturb them. She turned to leave. "Princess." Grant's voice was firm but not unkind. "Would you like to see what we're planning?" Liara hesitated. Morgan had said he did not want her around. But Grant was offering. She walked over slowly. The holographic map showed the border region. Red markers indicated Krithian positions. Blue markers showed Zalari forces. There were far more red markers than blue. "The Krithians are pushing along 3 main corridors," Grant explained, pointing at the map. "They're trying to split our forces. If they succeed, they can take the core systems one at a time." "What will you do?" Liara asked. Morgan finally spoke. "We'll collapse the flanks and force them into the center corridor. Then we'll hit them with everything we have in a concentrated defense." "But that means abandoning 2 systems," Liara said. "The people there will be evacuated before we pull back," Morgan said. "Every civilian, every soldier who isn't needed for the rear guard. We'll get them out." "And the rear guard? The soldiers who stay behind?" Morgan looked at her. His expression was unreadable. "They'll hold as long as they can. Then they'll retreat. Some won't make it," he paused. "That's war, Princess. People die. The best we can do is make sure they don't die for nothing." The words were harsh but honest. Liara felt her sheltered worldview cracking. War was not glorious. It was not noble. It was terrible choices and people dying. "When do you deploy?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow morning," Grant said. "The commander will take a strike force to the border. We'll coordinate the evacuation and set up the defensive line." Liara nodded. She looked at Morgan. "I know you do not want me involved, but I want you to know that I appreciate what you are doing for my people." Morgan studied her for a moment. Then he gave a slight nod. "Just doing the job." His voice was softer than before, but only slightly. That night, Liara could not stop thinking about the map, about the red markers pushing forward, about the soldiers who would stay behind to cover the evacuation, about Morgan going to the front lines. She had spent her whole life in the palace, safe, protected. She had studied diplomacy and culture and art, but she had never really understood what it took to keep her safe, what people sacrificed so she could sleep peacefully. The next morning, Liara went to the landing bay to see Morgan off. She told herself it was diplomatic duty, but really she just felt like she should be there. Morgan was loading gear onto his ship when she arrived. He saw her but did not acknowledge her presence. He just kept working, moving with that same economical efficiency. Lieutenant Grant walked over to Liara. The human woman had a kind face, which seemed odd for a warrior. "He doesn't mean to be cold," Grant said quietly. "It's just his way." "I understand," Liara said. "I know he thinks I am weak." "He doesn't think that," Grant said. People are afraid of him. It's been that way his whole career. He's learned not to expect anything else." Liara looked at the lieutenant. Grant had gentle eyes, but there was steel underneath. "Why do you follow him?" Liara asked. Grant smiled slightly. "Because he's the best, and because under all that armor and scar tissue, he's a good man. He saves people. That's what he does, and he does it even when they're terrified of him." The words stayed with Liara as Morgan's ship lifted off and disappeared into the sky. He saves people, even when they fear him. Over the next week, reports came back from the border. Morgan was executing his plan. The evacuations were proceeding. Civilian transports were arriving at the core worlds, full of refugees from the border systems. Liara visited the refugee centers. She met families who had lost their homes, children who were scared, elderly people who did not understand why they had to leave. But they were alive. Morgan had made sure of that. She also heard stories from the soldiers. They spoke about the human commander with a mixture of fear and respect. He was demanding. He accepted no excuses, but he also led from the front. When the fighting was worst, Morgan was there. When soldiers were wounded, he carried them to safety himself. One soldier told Liara about seeing Morgan walk through plasma fire to reach a pinned-down squad. The heat should have killed him. His armor should have melted. But he just kept moving, pulled the wounded soldiers to cover, and then went back for the dead. "He went back for the dead?" Liara asked. The soldier nodded. "Said their families deserve to bury them properly. Said no soldier gets left behind alive or dead." The soldier's eyes were distant, remembering. "I was terrified of him when he first arrived. Now I'd follow him anywhere." Liara began spending more time in the war room. She watched the tactical displays and learned to read the battle reports. She saw Morgan's strategy unfold. The Crithians were being funneled into the center corridor just as he planned. But she also saw something the other observers seemed to miss. In every engagement, Morgan prioritized saving lives over tactical gains. When a Zalari general suggested destroying a Crithian supply depot that was near a civilian area, Morgan refused. The general was furious. Liara heard the recorded communication. The general accused Morgan of being soft, of putting the enemy above his own mission. Morgan's response was cold and final. "We're soldiers, not butchers. We don't bomb civilians, even enemy civilians. If you want a war criminal, hire someone else. Otherwise, follow my orders." The general backed down. He had no choice. Morgan had full operational command. Liara found herself admiring that. Morgan was the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy. He could have done anything he wanted, but he chose to follow rules. He chose to protect civilians, even enemy civilians. 2 weeks after Morgan deployed, disaster struck. A Zalari officer disobeyed evacuation orders to pursue a tactical advantage. He thought he could trap a Crethian unit if he moved fast enough. Instead, he left a civilian settlement exposed. The Crithians counterattacked. The settlement was cut off. Hundreds of civilians were trapped between the two armies. Liara watched from the war room as the situation developed. The officer who had disobeyed orders was calling for reinforcements. But Morgan's response was something else entirely. The war continued for another month. Liara spent more and more time in the war room, learning to read tactical displays and understand military strategy. She was no longer just watching. She was learning. Lieutenant Grant became her teacher. The human woman was patient and kind, explaining things that Liara did not understand. How supply lines worked, why certain positions were important, what made a good defensive position versus a good attacking position. "The commander thinks you have potential," Grant said one day. They were studying a map together, planning refugee routes. Liara looked up, surprised. "He said that?" "In his own way. He asked me to teach you. Morgan doesn't waste time on people he thinks are useless." Grant smiled. "He sees something in you. He just won't admit it out loud." Liara felt a strange warmth at those words. Morgan thought she had potential. The most dangerous warrior in the galaxy thought she was worth teaching. She worked harder after that. She studied battle reports late into the night. She memorized supply routes and defensive positions. She learned how to coordinate evacuation efforts and manage refugee centers. And slowly, her fear of Morgan began to fade. She still respected his danger, but she no longer felt terror when he was near. Instead, she felt something like admiration. Morgan's strategy was working. The Crithians had been funneled into the center corridor just as he planned. Now came the hard part. The Zalari Empire had to hold a single defensive line against the full weight of the Crithian advance. The critical system was Talgren 4. It was a border world with good defensive positions and a major supply hub. If the Empire could hold Talgren 4, they could stop the Crithian advance. If they lost it, the war was over. Emperor Caldris made a decision that shocked everyone. He announced he would personally visit the frontline headquarters on Talgren 4. He wanted to show the soldiers that their emperor stood with them. Morgan was furious. Liara watched the communication from the war room. The human commander's face was hard as stone. "Your Majesty, with all respect, this is a terrible idea. Talgren 4 is a war zone. Having you there will divert resources from the defense. It puts you at risk. It puts everyone at risk," but Caldris was firm. "My people need to see their emperor fighting alongside them. The decision is made." Morgan closed his eyes for a moment, clearly fighting to control his temper. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. "If you insist on this photo opportunity, at least leave the princess on the capital. Don't put both of you at risk." Liara felt her father's eyes on her. She knew what he was thinking. The royal family needed to show unity. She took a deep breath. "I will accompany my father," she said. Her voice was steady. "If he goes, I go." Morgan looked at her through the display. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect? Frustration? She could not tell. "Fine. But when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, you follow my orders without question." "Understood." "Understood," Liara and her father said together. 3 days later, Liara stood in a military transport heading to Talgren 4. Her father sat across from her, looking tired but determined. Around them sat the Imperial Guard, elite soldiers tasked with protecting the royal family. Liara had never been to a war zone before. She had never left the core worlds. Now she was heading straight into the most dangerous place in the Empire. When they arrived at the frontline headquarters, Morgan was waiting. He looked even more grim than usual. He gave a curt salute and led them into the command center. The headquarters was built into a mountain with layers of armor and shielding. It should have been safe, but Liara noticed the tension in everyone's faces. The soldiers looked nervous. The officers checked their weapons too often. Morgan briefed them on the situation. The Crithian main force was gathering. They would attack within days. "We're as ready as we're going to be. But I want you both on the first transport back to the capital tomorrow morning. We will leave after the ceremonial dinner tonight," Caldris said. "I want to address the troops first." Morgan looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. There was no point. The Emperor had made his decision. That evening they held a formal dinner in one of the command center's larger halls. Officers and soldiers gathered to hear the Emperor speak. Caldris gave a good speech about courage and duty. The soldiers seemed inspired. Liara sat at the head table, picking at her food. She was not hungry. Something felt wrong. The air felt too tense. People moved too quickly. She noticed Morgan was not eating at all. He sat at the far end of the table, his eyes constantly scanning the room. His hand never moved far from his sidearm. Then the alarm started screaming. Morgan was moving before anyone else reacted. He vaulted over the table, drawing his weapon in one smooth motion. His voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Hostile insertion. All combat personnel to defensive positions. Civilian and command staff to the evacuation points. Move! The hall erupted into motion. Soldiers ran for their weapons. Officers shouted orders. And then the first explosion rocked the building. Liara was thrown to the floor. Her ears rang. Smoke filled the air. She could hear weapons fire in the distance getting closer. Someone grabbed her arm and pulled her up. It was Morgan. His face was spattered with blood, but she did not think it was his own. "Stay with me," he said. Then he was shouting into his comm unit. "Grant, status report." Grant's voice came back, distorted by static. Crithian commandos breached the lower levels. They used captured access codes. Communications are jammed. Landing platforms are destroyed. "We're trapped." Morgan cursed in a language Liara did not recognize. Then he was moving, pulling her and her father toward a side corridor. Imperial guards formed around them. They ran through smoking corridors. Behind them, Liara could hear the sounds of fighting. Screams, gunfire, explosions. The war had found them. Morgan led them to a reinforced bunker deep in the complex. He positioned the guards at the entrance and started coordinating the defense through his comm unit. His voice was calm and controlled even though everything was falling apart. Liara watched him work. This was what he was trained for. This was what made him legendary. In the middle of chaos, Morgan became more focused, not less. He gave orders. He directed defenders. He organized evacuation routes, but there were too many Crithians. They had planned this perfectly. A decapitation strike, meant to kill the Emperor and break the Empire's leadership. "We need to break out," Morgan said. "We can't hold here forever. But the main corridors are blocked. We'll have to go through the maintenance tunnels. Can we make it?" Caldris asked. Morgan looked at the Emperor. "Some of us will. Maybe all of us, if we're lucky." He checked his weapon.
"Stay behind me."
"Stay quiet. And if I tell you to run, you run." No arguments. They moved out. The maintenance tunnels were narrow and dark. Morgan took point, moving through the shadows like a ghost. The Imperial guards followed, then Liara and her father with more guards bringing up the rear. They had gone maybe 100 meters when they ran into a Crithian patrol. Morgan opened fire instantly. The tunnel lit up with gunfire. Liara pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. She watched Morgan fight. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. He moved with perfect economy, never wasting a motion. Every shot found its target. Every movement was precise, but there were so many of them. A Crithian commando got past Morgan's line of fire. It was coming straight at her father. Morgan saw it happen.
He threw himself forward, intercepting the enemy soldier.
They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The fight was brutal and fast. Fists, knives, no room for guns. Morgan won. But when he stood up, Liara saw blood spreading across his side. He had been wounded protecting her father. "Keep moving," Morgan said through gritted teeth. He pressed a hand to his side but did not slow down. They continued through the tunnels. More firefights. More narrow escapes. Morgan was bleeding badly now, but he refused to stop. He led them forward step by step, getting them closer to safety. Then disaster. An explosion collapsed the tunnel ahead. They were cut off from the extraction point. And behind them, they could hear more Crithian forces approaching. Morgan looked at the blocked tunnel, then at his comm unit. He was calculating something. Finally, he pointed to a side passage. "There. It leads to a storage area. Defensible position. We hole up there and wait for Grant to reach us." They reached the storage area just as the Crithians caught up. The Imperial guards took up positions at the entrance. Morgan set up a defensive line. Then he slumped against a wall, finally allowing himself to show pain. Liara went to him. His wound was bad. The armor had stopped most of it, but not all. Blood soaked his uniform. "Let me help," she said. He looked at her. His face was pale, but his eyes were still sharp. "Can you use a weapon?" "I have basic training, but I have never—" He pulled a pistol from his belt and handed it to her. "Safety here. Point and shoot. If they get past us, you protect your father. Understand?" Liara took the weapon. It was heavy and cold. "I understand." Morgan allowed himself a small smile. "You're braver than you think, Princess." Then the Crithians attacked. For the next several hours they fought. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers. The Imperial Guards died one by one, holding the line. Morgan coordinated the defense from his position, too wounded to fight directly but still directing every move. The attack on Talgrin 4 had failed, but it came at a cost. 30 soldiers dead, twice that many wounded, and the Imperial headquarters was severely damaged. They had to evacuate to a secondary command center. Jake Morgan spent 3 days in the medical bay. His wound was serious, but human healing was remarkable. What would have killed most species just slowed him down. The doctors said he should rest for a month. He was back on duty in a week. When Liara and her father returned to the capital, something had changed. News of the attack spread across the empire. The story of the princess who stood her ground in a war zone, the emperor who refused to abandon his soldiers, and the human warrior who protected them both. Public opinion shifted. Humans were still feared, but now they were also respected. Morgan became more than just a dangerous mercenary. He became a symbol of strength and honor. Liara found herself unable to return to her old life. She had seen war. She had faced death. She could not go back to studying art and diplomacy and pretending the galaxy was a safe place. So she asked her father for a new role. She wanted to coordinate humanitarian relief in the war zones. She wanted to help the refugees, the wounded, the displaced. She wanted to do something useful. Keldris looked at his daughter with new eyes. "You have changed," he said. "War changes everyone," Liara replied. "The question is whether we become better or worse." "I want to become better." Her father approved the new role. Liara threw herself into the work. She coordinated with military logistics to ensure refugee transports had safe routes. She managed supply distribution to make sure aid reached those who needed it. She visited the wounded in hospitals and the displaced in refugee centers. It was hard work. Exhausting work, but it was meaningful in a way her old life never had been. She also started working more closely with Morgan's staff. Lieutenant Grant became a friend and mentor. The human woman taught Liara about military operations and tactical thinking. They worked together to coordinate combat operations with civilian evacuation. And sometimes Morgan himself would return to the capital for strategy meetings. Each time Liara noticed he seemed a little less distant, a little more willing to talk. Not friendly exactly, but not cold either. One day they were working together on evacuation routes from the next system the Empire would have to defend. It was late. Everyone else had gone home. Just Liara and Jake remained, studying maps and logistics reports. "You have learned quickly," Morgan said. It was the first time he had directly praised her work. Liara felt pleased but tried not to show it too much. "Lieutenant Grant is a good teacher. Grant is excellent. But the student matters too. You have good instincts for this work." He paused, studying a map. "You care about the people. That is rare in high command. You care about them too," Liara said. "I have watched you work. Every decision you make considers the cost in lives." Morgan looked at her. "Someone has to. War is about killing, but it does not have to be about cruelty. You can be effective without being a monster." "Is that what you learned in your training?" "No, I learned that from watching monsters, knowing what I did not want to become." He turned back to the map. "The galaxy needs warriors, but it needs the right kind of warriors, ones who protect rather than destroy." They worked in comfortable silence after that. Liara realized that she was no longer afraid of him. She was no longer even intimidated. She just saw him as a person. A complicated, damaged, but fundamentally good person. The war continued. Morgan's defensive strategy was holding. The Crithians could not break through the fortified positions, but they also were not giving up. Both sides settled into a grinding war of attrition. Then intelligence came in that changed everything. Liara was in the war room when the report arrived. A diplomatic contact in neutral territory had information about the Crithian supply network. The Crithian war machine depended on a single massive logistics hub. It was called Terminus Station, located deep behind enemy lines. Everything flowed through it: weapons, ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything. If Terminus Station was destroyed, the Crithian offensive would collapse. They would not be able to supply their frontline forces. The war would be over, but getting to Terminus Station would be almost impossible. It was heavily defended, deep in Crithian space, surrounded by their fleet. A direct assault would fail. Morgan studied the intelligence for 3 days straight. Liara watched him work, analyzing every detail. Finally, he called a meeting with the Emperor and High Command. "I think we can do it," Morgan said, "but it will take most of my forces, and it is extremely high risk." He laid out his plan. A small strike force would infiltrate Crithian space disguised as a merchant convoy. They would dock with Terminus Station, claiming engine trouble. Once inside, they would fight their way to the power core and destroy it. The generals looked skeptical. "What are the odds of success?" one asked. Morgan was blunt. "Maybe 50%. But if we succeed, we win the war. If we do nothing, we lose slowly." The Emperor looked at his daughter. Liara knew what he was thinking. Sending Morgan on this mission meant weakening the capital's defenses. If the Crithians attacked here while Morgan was away, they would be vulnerable. But they had to take the chance. "Do it," Caldris said. "Take whoever you need. End this war." Morgan nodded. Then he said something that surprised everyone. "I want Princess Liara to command the palace defense in my absence." The room went silent. Generals looked shocked. Caldris looked uncertain. Liara felt her heart racing. "Commander, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not qualified." "You are more qualified than you think," Morgan interrupted. "You have learned tactics from Grant. You understand logistics. You care about protecting people. And most importantly, you have proven yourself under fire at Talgrin 4. He looked directly at her. "If the Crithians attack the capital while I am gone, someone needs to hold the line. I trust you to do it." Those words meant more to Liara than anything anyone had ever said to her. Jake Morgan, the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy, trusted her. He believed in her. "I will not let you down," she said quietly. Morgan gave one of his rare almost smiles. "I know you will not." The Emperor agreed to the plan. Over the next week, Morgan prepared his strike force. 50 of the best soldiers from human and Zalari forces. They would travel in 2 modified merchant ships, carrying enough firepower to fight their way through the station. Lieutenant Grant stayed behind to help Liara. Together they reviewed the capital's defenses. They planned fallback positions. They coordinated with the fleet. They made sure that if an attack came, they would be ready. The night before Morgan left, Liara found him on a palace balcony. He stood alone, looking at the stars. She approached quietly. "Could not sleep?" she asked. "Never do before a mission. Too much to think about." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Liara spoke. "Thank you for trusting me with the defense. It means a great deal. You earned it. You are not the same person who was afraid to meet me in the landing bay. And you are not the cold warrior who wanted me to stay away." Morgan smiled slightly. "Maybe we both learned something." He pulled his backup pistol from his belt, the same one he had given her at Talgrin 4. "Here, keep this. Just in case." Liara took the weapon. "You will need all your weapons. I have plenty. And I like knowing you have one of mine. For luck." He looked at her seriously. "If things go wrong at the capital, get your father to safety. Do not try to be a hero. Just survive. I could say the same to you. I am always careful." His voice was lighter, almost teasing. "You are never careful. You throw yourself into danger to save others." Morgan shrugged. "Someone has to." Liara looked at him. This man who had terrified her, who had saved her, who had taught her what real courage looked like. "Come back safely," she said. "That is an order from the princess." Morgan gave a small bow. "Yes, Your Highness." Then, more seriously, "You hold the line here. I will end the war out there. Deal?" "Deal." The next morning, Liara stood on the palace battlements and watched Morgan's ships lift off. They climbed into the sky and disappeared among the stars. Lieutenant Grant stood beside her. "He will succeed," Grant said confidently. "He always does. I hope you're right. And you will hold the capital if needed." "He trained you well." Liara touched the pistol at her belt. Morgan's pistol, a symbol of trust. "I will not fail him," she said. 2 days later, the Crithian fleet appeared in orbit above the capital. Warlord Kresh himself led the attack. He had been waiting for Morgan to leave. The war had come home, and Princess Liara, who had once been too afraid to meet a human warrior, now stood in the command center, ready to defend her world. The alarms screamed across the capital. Liara stood in the command center, watching the tactical displays. Red markers showed Crithian ships dropping into orbit. There were dozens of them. This was not a raid. This was a full assault. Lieutenant Grant stood beside her. They waited for Morgan to leave. Smart. What do we do? Liara asked. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. What Morgan taught us. First, evacuate non-essential personnel. Second, activate all defense systems. Third, position forces for maximum effectiveness. Grant looked at her. You are in command. What are your orders? Liara took a deep breath. She thought about everything she had learned. Everything Morgan and Grant had taught her. Begin civilian evacuation immediately. Priority to children and elderly. Get them to the shelters. Activate the planetary shields. Position our defense fleet in defensive formation Alpha. And get me a comm line to Warlord Kresh. Grant raised an eyebrow. You want to talk to him? Yes. Morgan once told me that sometimes the best weapon is information. I want to know what Kresh wants. Maybe we can negotiate. Grant smiled. He taught you well. I will get you that connection. The command center became a controlled chaos. Officers relayed orders. Soldiers moved to defensive positions. Civilian evacuation began. And through it all, Liara stood calm and focused. She was terrified. But she did not show it. Her people needed to see strength. So she gave them strength. The comm officer called out. We have Warlord Kresh. He is willing to speak. Liara stepped to the communication station. Put him through. The main display showed Warlord Kresh. He was a massive Krithian with dark armor and the scars of 1,000 battles. His eyes were intelligent and calculating. Princess Liara, he said. His voice was surprisingly cultured. I had hoped to speak with your emperor. My father is coordinating the defense. I command the palace forces. State your terms. Kresh studied her through the display. You are the one who survived Talgrin IV, the sheltered princess who stood with the human warrior. I am. And I will stand here too. What do you want, Warlord? Surrender. Your human mercenary is gone, attacking Terminus Station. He cannot save you this time. Surrender the capital and I will guarantee safe passage for all civilians. Resist and I will level your city. So Kresh knew about Morgan's mission. That was bad. But Liara kept her face neutral. I cannot surrender, but I can offer you a ceasefire. Give me time to evacuate civilians and I will speak with my father about terms. Kresh laughed. You want time. Time for your human warrior to complete his mission and return. I know your tactics, Princess. I learned them from fighting Morgan. He leaned forward. But I respect courage. I will give you 4 hours to begin evacuation. Then my forces land. Choose your response carefully. The connection cut. Liara turned to Grant. 4 hours. We need to evacuate as many people as possible in that time, and prepare for the assault. What about your father? Will he approve evacuation? Liara smiled grimly. He put me in command. I make the decisions now. Get those civilians moving. The evacuation was massive. Thousands of people moving to underground shelters. Transports lifting off every few minutes. The palace guard worked alongside civilians, helping the elderly and carrying children. Liara coordinated everything from the command center. She used every trick Morgan had taught her. Multiple evacuation routes to prevent bottlenecks. Priority systems to get the most vulnerable out first. Clear communication so people did not panic. And it worked. By the time the 4 hours ended, most of the civilian population was in shelters or evacuated from the city. Not everyone. There was never enough time for everyone, but far more than would have survived without preparation. Then the Krithian assault began. Their ships hammered the planetary shields with weapons fire. The shields held, but not forever. Liara watched the power levels dropping. They had maybe 2 hours before the shields failed. The Zalari defense fleet fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Ships exploded in orbit. Others retreated, damaged and burning. Grant came to her. Princess, we have a problem. The eastern shield generator is failing faster than expected. If it goes down, Krithian troops can land directly in the palace district. Can we reinforce it? We would need to divert forces from the main defensive line. It would weaken our position, Liara thought fast. She looked at the tactical display. If the eastern generator failed, the Krithians could land right in the city. But if they weakened the main line, the Krithians might break through anyway. What would Morgan do? He would protect the civilians first, always. Divert forces to protect the generator. We cannot let Krithian troops land in the civilian areas. Hold the main line as long as possible, but protecting civilians is the priority. Grant nodded. Morgan would make the same call. She moved to relay the orders. The battle intensified. Krithian landing craft made it through the failing shields. They landed in the city outskirts. Enemy soldiers poured out, pushing toward the palace. Solari forces met them at prepared defensive positions. The fighting was brutal. Every street became a battlefield, every building a fortress. Liara watched from the command center, making decisions, sending reinforcements here, ordering a retreat there, coordinating fire support. It was exhausting and terrifying, but she kept going. She thought about Morgan. He was out there somewhere, attacking Terminus Station, fighting his own battle. She hoped he was safe. She hoped he would succeed, but right now she had her own war to fight. An officer called out, "Princess, we're receiving a transmission. It is from Commander Morgan." Liara felt hope surge. She rushed to the communications station. "Jake, are you there?" Morgan's voice came through, distorted by distance. "Liara, we're at Terminus Station. The assault is going well, but..." He paused. "We have a problem." Liara's heart sank. "What kind of problem?" "The station is rigged to explode. If I destroy the power core like planned, it will create a massive blast, big enough to destroy my entire fleet." His voice was calm, but she could hear the strain. "I can override the self-destruct manually, but someone has to stay behind." Liara understood immediately. Morgan was going to sacrifice himself to complete the mission. "Jake, no. There has to be another way. If there was, I would take it. But this is what I trained for. This is what I do." He paused. "How's the defense going?" Liara wanted to lie, to tell him everything was fine. But Morgan deserved the truth. "Kresh is attacking the capital. We are holding, but barely. If you destroy Terminus Station, it might convince him to retreat, but..." She took a breath. "I have another idea." "I'm listening. Wait, give me 10 minutes before you start the self-destruct override. I'm going to contact Kresh." "Liara, what are you planning?" "Something you taught me. That the best weapon is sometimes words, not guns." "Trust me." There was silence on the line. Then Morgan spoke. "I trust you. 10 minutes. Then I start the override." The connection ended. Liara turned to the comm officer. "Get me Warlord Kresh now." Grant came over. "What are you planning?" "Something crazy. But it might work." Kresh appeared on the display. His armor was scorched from battle. "Princess, have you come to surrender?" "No, I have come to offer you information. Commander Morgan is at Terminus Station right now. He is about to destroy it. Your entire war machine will collapse." Kresh's expression darkened. He clearly already knew this. "But that is not all," Liara continued. "The station is rigged to kill him when he completes the mission. He knows this. He is going to sacrifice himself anyway, because that is what humans do. They protect others even when it costs them everything." Kresh leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am offering you a choice. A ceasefire. Right now. You pull back your forces and I will personally lead a rescue mission to save Morgan. I will risk my life to save your enemy. And in doing so, I will prove that my empire can show mercy, even in war." The command center went silent. Everyone was watching. This was insane. Offering to save Morgan in exchange for a ceasefire. Kresh studied her. "You would risk yourself?" "The Imperial heir?" "Yes. Because Morgan taught me that courage means doing the right thing even when it is terrifying. You respect strength, Warlord. You respect honor. I am showing you both." Kresh was quiet for a long moment. Liara held her breath. Finally he spoke. "I have fought your human warrior many times. He is a worthy enemy, and you, Princess, have proven yourself worthy as well." He paused. "I accept your ceasefire. But if you fail to save Morgan, the war continues." "Understood. Grant me safe passage to Terminus Station." "You have it. I will even escort you myself." "This I want to see." The connection ended. Liara turned to find her father standing in the command center. He had been watching the whole exchange. "Daughter, that was the bravest and most foolish thing I have ever seen. It was the only choice. We cannot let Jake die. Not after everything he has done for us," Caldris smiled. "Then go, save our human warrior. Bring him home." Liara ran for the landing bay. Grant followed. "You know this is crazy, right?" Grant said as they ran. Liara smiled. "Jake does crazy things all the time. My turn." They boarded a fast shuttle. Kresh was true to his word. A Krithian escort formed around them, protecting them as they raced toward Terminus Station. Liara contacted Morgan. "Jake, hold position. I am coming to get you." "What?" "Liara, you were supposed to defend the capital." "I negotiated a ceasefire. Now finish that override." Terminus Station loomed in the viewport. It was massive, an industrial complex the size of a small moon. Smoke poured from damaged sections. Fires burned in exposed areas. And somewhere inside, Jake Morgan was finishing his mission. Lieutenant Grant piloted the shuttle toward a docking port. We have maybe 10 minutes before the controlled destruction starts. After that, this place becomes a death trap. Then we get in and out fast, Liara said. She checked Morgan's pistol at her belt. She had never expected to use it like this. They docked. The station was chaos inside. Emergency lights flashed. Alarms wailed. Structural supports groaned. The whole place was dying. Grant led the way through smoking corridors. Morgan said he was at the central power core. That way, they ran. The station shuddered around them. Explosions echoed in the distance. They passed bodies of Crithian defenders. Morgan's work, probably. Finally, they reached the power core chamber. It was a vast space filled with massive machinery. And in the center, working at a control terminal, was Jake Morgan. He looked up as they entered. His face showed surprise, then something that might have been relief. "You actually came," he said. "I told you I would. Are you finished here?" "Almost. The override is set. The station will destroy itself in a controlled manner. No massive explosion." He looked at the terminal. "Just need another minute." Grant checked her scanner. "We have 5 minutes to get back to the shuttle before this section collapses." Morgan worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. Liara watched him, this warrior who had saved her people so many times. This dangerous man who was also a protector. Finally, he hit one last button. "Done, let's move." They ran back through the collapsing station. Behind them, the power core began its controlled shutdown. Explosions rippled through the structure, but they were calculated, sequential. Morgan had done his job perfectly. They reached the shuttle with seconds to spare. Grant launched immediately. The station broke apart behind them, massive sections drifting into space. But it was not the catastrophic explosion that would have destroyed Morgan's fleet. It was exactly what he planned. Safe in the shuttle, Morgan looked at Liara. Really looked at her. "You negotiated a ceasefire with Kresh. How?" I told him the truth. That you were sacrificing yourself to complete the mission. That you were protecting people even if it cost you everything. And I offered to prove that my empire could show mercy, even to its enemies. She paused. "I offered to risk myself to save you." Morgan shook his head in disbelief. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid." Liara smiled. "You do incredibly brave and incredibly stupid things all the time. I learned from the best," he laughed. Actually laughed. It was the first time Liara had heard him laugh. I suppose I deserved that. They returned to the capital under Crithian escort. It was surreal. Enemy ships protecting them. But Kresh kept his word. When they landed at the palace, Emperor Kaldris was waiting. So was Warlord Kresh. The two leaders stood across from each other, surrounded by their guards. Liara and Morgan walked between them. Kresh spoke first. "Your daughter has courage, Emperor. She risked herself for her enemy. That is a strength my people respect. And your human warrior fights with honor," Kresh continued, looking at Morgan. "He could have killed our wounded at Terminus Station. He could have destroyed civilian targets. He did neither. That is also strength," Kaldris nodded slowly. "Perhaps we have fought long enough. Perhaps it is time to talk peace. I agree. My supply lines are broken. Your forces are strong. We could fight for years and accomplish nothing. Or we could find another way." And so, in the palace landing bay, surrounded by soldiers who moments before had been enemies, peace talks began. The negotiations took weeks. Liara represented the Empire with her father's blessing. She discovered she was good at this. Understanding different perspectives. Finding common ground. Building trust. Kresh was a fair negotiator. Tough but honest. He wanted territory for his expanding people. The Empire could provide that in neutral zones. In exchange, the Crithians would respect imperial borders and establish trade. It was not perfect. But it was peace. During the negotiations, Jake Morgan prepared to leave. His contract was complete. The war was over. It was time for him to move on. Liara found him in the palace gardens one evening. He stood looking at the sunset, his ship visible in the distance, being prepared for departure. "So you are really leaving," she said. "Contract is done. Time to find the next job." Liara was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "What if I told you there was a job here? Teaching at the Imperial War College. Training our officers. Building a real military? Morgan looked at her, surprised. Why would you want me to stay? Because you taught me what real strength is. Not fear, not violence, but protecting others even when it costs you. Our military needs that. Our people need that. She paused. I need that, Liara. I know you are used to being alone, to being feared, but you do not have to be alone anymore. You have a place here, with people who respect you, who care about you. She met his eyes. Please consider it. Morgan looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the gardens, the palace, the city beyond, a place where for the first time in years he was not just a weapon. He was a person. I will think about it, he said finally. 3 days later, the formal peace treaty was signed. Zelari and Krithian representatives gathered in the Great Hall. Emperor Kaldris and Warlord Kresh put their marks on the document. The war was over. That evening there was a celebration. Music and food and joy. People who had been enemies days before now talked and laughed together. It was strange, but also hopeful. Liara stood with her father watching the celebration. Morgan stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in formal clothes instead of armor. You did well, daughter, Kaldris said. The peace is largely your work. I had good teachers. She looked at Morgan. Her father smiled and walked away, leaving them alone. Have you decided? Liara asked Morgan. About the teaching position? Morgan was quiet. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A datapad showing a message from the Imperial War College. They sent me the formal offer this morning. And? I have spent 15 years as a mercenary, fighting wars for other people, always moving, never staying. He looked around the hall. Maybe it is time to try something different. Liara felt hope rising. So you will stay? Morgan looked at her. For the first time since she met him, he smiled. Really smiled. Yes, I will stay. Liara felt tears in her eyes. She did not try to hide them. Thank you. For everything. For protecting us. For teaching me. For staying. Thank you for seeing past the monster. For giving me a reason to stay. He paused. For reminding me I am more than just a weapon. They stood together watching the celebration. A human warrior and an alien princess, once separated by fear, now connected by respect, friendship, and something deeper. 3 months later, the Imperial War College opened its new term. Jake Morgan stood before a class of officer candidates. He looked uncomfortable at first. Teaching was different from fighting, but as he began to speak about strategy, about protecting civilians, about the honor of service, the students listened. They saw not just a dangerous warrior, but a teacher worth learning from. Princess Liara often visited his classes. She was busy with diplomatic work, building bridges with the Krithians and other neighboring powers. But she made time. Sometimes they would walk in the palace gardens together, talking about their work. About the future. About how the galaxy was changing. One evening as they walked, Morgan spoke. You know, when I first came here, I thought it would be just another contract. Get in, do the job, get out. What changed? Liara asked. You did. You were afraid of me, but you did not let that fear control you. You learned, you grew, you became stronger. He smiled. You reminded me why I do this work. Not for money or reputation, but to protect people like you. People worth protecting. Liara stopped walking. She looked at him seriously. And you reminded me what real courage is. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Not seeking glory, but doing what is right. She paused. You showed me that even the most dangerous warrior can also be the most honorable. They stood in the garden, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Two people from different worlds, connected by war but choosing peace. Across the galaxy, humans were still feared. Their reputation as dangerous warriors remained. But on one world, things were different. On Valdoria Prime, a human warrior taught the next generation of officers about honor and duty. He trained them to be protectors, not just fighters, and they listened, because they saw in him something worth emulating. And a princess who had once cried in fear now stood as a symbol of bridge building. She worked with former enemies. She advocated for peace. She showed that understanding could overcome fear. Together, they changed their corner of the galaxy. Not through violence, though violence had brought them together, but through teaching, learning, and the simple act of seeing past fear to the person underneath. Years later, when historians wrote about the end of the Zalari-Krithian War, They focused on the battles, the tactics, the strategies, but those who lived through it knew the truth. The war ended not because of superior firepower or brilliant military planning. It ended because a princess overcame her fear. Because a warrior found something worth protecting.